I watched a recent video of Trevor on the conflict between Israel and Palestine, and I'm having some problem understanding the logic there. So, Trevor, I was wondering if you could help me understand it. And I'm going to address this not as an Israeli living in Israel and terrified from barrages of rockets being shot at him, but rather as a data scientist, which is my profession. So, Trevor, the first thing you said is, let's look at who's dead and who's alive this week in order to understand if this conflict is a fair fight. And you said, well, there's only 2 dead Israelis and there are 28 dead Palestinians. So the first thing as a data analyst is that you look at who are these people. So you didn't mention that more than half of the Palestinians that you said were Hamas terrorists. And many of the terrorists were found while they were trying to launch rockets. There is video footage of the IDF of a lot of these airstrikes, and you can see the Palestinians, Hamas terrorists, while they are trying to launch these rockets, being shot down. Some of them are high-ranking officials of the Hamas that were killed. So that's the first thing that needs to be mentioned. But that's not really the issue, right? Because if we want it to be a fair fight, there's still many Palestinian civilians which are killed, lots of children, and it is a terrible situation. There's no question about that. But how can we make it a fair fight, right? So either, well, why are they such a small number of dead Israelis? So one thing is, how do you not die from rockets? So number one, you go into a shelter. And by law, there are shelters everywhere. In Israel, all the new houses have to have a safe room built into the apartment, so you can very quickly go to a safe place. And Israelis go into these safe places. They have sirens, and therefore lots of Israelis aren't killed. We later also developed the Iron Dome to stop the rockets coming in. It's 90% effective, which is very good. So one way to make it a fair fight is to have more dead Jews, and therefore taking away the shelter and the Iron Dome. But you might say, no, I just want there to be less dead Palestinians. Well, first, it would be nice if Palestinians had shelters, but the Hamas didn't build any to them, even though it clearly has the capabilities, since it built very elaborate tunnels that go all the way across the border into Israel in order to kill civilians on the Israeli side. Now, a lot of these tunnels were discovered by the Israeli army and blown up, thank God. So they clearly have the capability of building bunkers, but they haven't done it. And why haven't they done it? Well, because they are using their population to protect their rocket launchers and their arsenal of weapons. Because we know in the last conflict that reporters went into Gaza and they videoed rocket launchers right next to the houses that they were staying. I will add in the description the videos that, we're not talking about the IDF or the Israeli media, God forbid. We're talking about international media that went in. There was even a reporter reporting from a hospital, and while she was reporting, there was a barrage of rockets launched just behind the hospital. So they are trying to use the hospitals, the schools, the population to stop the Israelis from retaliating, not retaliating, actually. They are trying to use the hospitals and the schools and the population to stop Israel from taking down those rocket launchers, and is why they can continue shooting these rockets into Israel. To understand why this isn't a fair fight and why talking about proportionate response isn't relevant is because this isn't a response, this isn't an equation. Hamas, the way it defines success, and this is important if you want to understand the resulting numbers that you're looking at, is killing as many civilians as possible. And the success of Israel is having no dead civilians, and that's it. Just not having people dying on our side, not having rockets launched at us. And the reason there are such small amount of Israeli civilians dead is because we are using our amazing tech in order to get to that goal, in order to not have any dead civilians, which is why we have shelters and why we have Iron Dome. And the Hamas is trying to kill as many civilians as possible. And many of its civilians, by the way, are actually killed by their own rockets. A third of the launches of Hamas actually fall inside the Gaza Strip. They don't even make it beyond the border. And the fact that they put their rocket launchers and they force the Israeli army to shoot at the rocket launchers which are near populated areas, which are in populated areas, that is what is causing the high resulting number of deaths on the Palestinian side. And to quote the former Prime Minister of Israel, Golda Meir, she said, "We can forgive the Palestinian terrorists of killing our children, but what we can't forgive them is making us kill their children." So instead of asking who is dead and who is alive this week, we need to ask who is trying to protect their civilians and who is trying to use their civilians. And then we can answer the question if this is a fair fight or a fair conflict. But you see, Trevor, in all the monologue you had, you still had one spark of genius. You understood what human history was missing all along, to be fair. More dead